Cold didn't care who you were during the war. Cold didn't care if you were a soldier or a civilian. During World War II, entire cities went dark, fuel vanished, and winters didn't pause for ration books. Civilians across Europe faced nights where there was no electricity, no central heating, and barely enough fuel to last a week, let alone a season. Yet people survived winters that killed thousands, not because they were tougher, but because they understood heat in a way modern homes no longer demand. One of the most effective heating methods used by civilians required no machinery, no electricity, and no piles of firewood. It relied on a single log, burned slowly, deliberately, and intelligently. Entire families slept through freezing nights using this technique, not as folklore, but as daily routine. This wasn't comfort. This was survival through understanding fire. During World War II, coal and firewood were heavily rationed. Bombed rail lines disrupted fuel delivery. Forest access was restricted or dangerous. In many occupied areas, civilians were legally limited in how much wood they could collect. Fires couldn't burn all night. A roaring hearth was wasteful and often impossible. What civilians needed wasn't brightness or quick heat. They needed endurance. They needed warmth that lasted until morning without constant tending. That need gave rise to a method older than the war itself, but refined under pressure: the overnight log burn. The principle was simple but precise. Instead of feeding a fire continuously, civilians used a single dense hardwood log placed in a way that forced it to burn slowly over many hours. Oak, beech, or similar dense woods were preferred because they burned longer and produced steady heat. The log wasn't laid flat. It was positioned lengthwise, often slightly elevated or angled, with limited airflow. Civilians restricted oxygen deliberately. Less oxygen meant slower combustion. The goal wasn't flame. It was sustained heat release. Once lit properly, the log would smoulder and glow, radiating warmth steadily through the night. Ash built up naturally around the base, further choking oxygen and slowing the burn. By morning, the log was often still warm enough to relight easily. An open fire? Well, it wastes heat vertically. Most of that precious warmth just rushes straight up the chimney. Wartime civilians, they understood this instinctively. They closed dampers, blocked excess airflow, and even used reflective surfaces like stone, brick, or metal to push heat back into the room. The slow-burning log produced radiant heat rather than flames. Radiant heat, you see, warms objects and bodies directly, not just the air. Thick masonry walls and floors absorbed this heat and released it gradually, keeping rooms warmer long after the visible fire had faded. This is why families could sleep through sub-zero nights without feeding the fire. The heat was stored, not consumed. Safety really mattered. Fires were managed carefully because, honestly, rebuilding after a house fire just wasn't an option during wartime. Civilians cleared hearths completely, used fire-resistant stone or brick bases, and, well, they never overloaded fuel. Ventilation was controlled, but, never eliminated. Chimneys were kept just open enough to prevent smoke build-up. Carbon monoxide was a known danger long before we had modern detectors. People learned to read the fire, the smoke, and even, how their bodies felt. Children were taught not to disturb the log. Adults checked airflow before sleep. This wasn't casual fire use. It was, without a doubt, disciplined. You know, this method actually remains relevant today, especially during power outages, in remote cabins, and in all sorts of emergency shelter scenarios. If you happen to have a fireplace or a stove, the same principle applies straight away. Just use one dense log instead of several small ones. And, well, make sure to restrict the airflow deliberately. The focus should be on heat retention, not on the size of the flame. In outdoor survival situations, the same concept works perfectly well with long fires. A single thick log burned slowly beside a reflective surface, like a rock wall or packed earth, can in fact provide warmth all night with only minimal fuel. The key thing to remember here is that fire isn't really about brightness. It's actually about control. Civilians didn't ask how warm they felt at bedtime. They asked whether the heat would last until morning. That shift in thinking changed everything. Heat was treated as a resource, not a comfort. People layered clothing, insulated sleeping areas, and relied on stored warmth rather than constant fuel consumption. The fire was only one part of the system. You know, modern survival often fails simply because people burn through fuel far too quickly. During the Second World War, civilians managed to survive because, well, they slowed everything down. The one-log heating method wasn't about being clever. It was absolutely necessary. It worked not by some trick, but because it respected physics instead of fighting it. Limited oxygen, dense fuel, radiant heat, and thermal mass, all of these did the real work. This whole mindset, it actually applies far beyond just fire. Water, food, energy, and even effort, they all last much longer when managed deliberately. If there's one thing history teaches, it's that patience is rewarded, not panic. So, if you're after survival knowledge that kept ordinary people alive under absolutely extraordinary pressure, well, this is it. Learn it, practice it, respect it. And if you want more real survival history like this, do subscribe to Survival Stories. And share this with someone who still thinks survival is all about having more gear instead of better understanding.